Good afternoon and welcome to The Road to Recovery, The Road to Freedom with Mark. This is my 28-minute slot every Friday, and I talk mostly about mental health. That's my big thing. That's the purpose for my show, and that's what The Road to Recovery is all about. And it's not just about talking about some book I read. It's about my personal experiences and the experiences of the people around me, my friends, the people who I have known who have gone through some very, very tough times in their life. And, there is no tutor-like experience. If you go through something, there is no requirement for empathy. Balls to bones exactly what it's like. And it gives you a unique perspective, not just on suffering, but on recovery, on how to get better and how to get well. And that, at the end of the day, is what I am all about. And I guess what all of us are trying to achieve is to make life as good as we can for other people and ourselves, of course. And, I'm of that age now where I find that I kick around with a lot of young fellas who are just around the periphery. I guess I'm some kind of not exactly father figure, but more like an uncle to them, and I'm a man who's travelled far and wide around the world and had some pretty amazing experiences. I've been to Southeast Asia in its heyday, bangers and all, to Africa, and lived in Europe, and I've read widely. I study every day, and I work every day, and that's good. It's good for my mental health to keep busy. I find that you can often get into a rut if you don't have enough to occupy yourself, and you can get very anxious and wound up and spin out, and when things go wrong, it exacerbates the situation and makes it worse because you're so focused on those things that are going wrong. It is very, very, very hard to see any way out, any escape from where you feel trapped. And so it is good to have not necessarily distractions. I'm not talking about time wasting, things like playing games. I'm talking about actually doing little things, projects that you like working on. My mate Quentin and I are working at the moment on old timbers that we pull out of the rivers, and then we just clean them up with chisels and stuff and just make them look awesome. And it's really good to get into something that is not just necessarily mental or intellectual, but something physical that you can do as well. I do a lot of walking down by rivers, and I found that extremely therapeutic, just being quiet and letting the river do its thing and just seeing all the bird life and maybe spotting a fish, watching trout jump. I know it sounds like something very simple that you might overlook or take for granted, but the more you get into it, the more you feel comfortable in your own skin and with nature. And, I remember one of the people who used to look after me when I was really, really bad, Aruna Patel. She told to me to take it easy on myself, just to not get so cramped, so wound, and to be a bit kinder to myself. Just take my time and slow down a little bit and look for things that just made me feel a little bit better. And once you start casting your net out and thinking about things that can help you be in a calm state, it makes an enormous difference, because then you find that you can get a lot more sleep. If you lack sleep, 2 days and 2 nights with no sleep, and you are pretty much a zombie. A week of it, you're paralyzed. It is so important to look after yourself, to try and eat. If you find yourself, as so many people do who suffer from mental health, you indulge in drugs to try and get yourself to another state. You're basically running away from your problem, and sinking yourself into whatever it might be. That is extraordinarily destructive. It is time wasting at best, but it erodes yourself, your happiness, and you just get into this rut of continual self-destruction and abuse. That's the only place that leads. And obviously, I do know what I'm talking about. And there are drugs and there are drugs, and we all know what I'm talking about. There are certain ones that are extraordinarily destructive. And if you know of anyone who is like smoking pee or anything like that, whatever it takes to get them off that, to get them away, the best thing I find is to get them out of the people who are dragging them into that, and try and get them away out on a holiday somewhere to one of our beautiful beaches, and just get away out of that scene and see that there is a better life to be had. Because once you get into that rut, it's very hard to get out. And when I'm talking to a lot of the young fellas that sort of kick around, I try not to lecture them, but I try to sprinkle in a bit of Eastern philosophy, the Buddha, Khalil Gibran, even Muhammad occasionally, and maybe I might throw in a little bit of philosophy, maybe some Socrates or Marcus Aurelius, Thomas Aquinas, and I do it very subtly, but I can see it makes them think, it makes their minds tick over, and what I'm trying to get across to them is there is so much more out there. They are young, their lives are unstable, they're moving from flat to flat, there's drugs and violence in their lives, and I try to get them away from that, get them into fishing, get them into hunting, get them into an appreciation of what is out there other than what you think is cool. And I understand, the drugs, the money, the birds, it's all very appealing to a young man. But I try to get them to realise that there are other things to be had that are equally as good, if not more rewarding in the long run, to develop skills, to be self-sufficient, to gain stability. And that is where your life can turn, your life can change into something so much better if you allow a few good things into your life. And does it work? I don't know. In the long run, I hope it will. I hope that I can see the potential, and that's the thing that really kind of really sticks in me, is that I can see the potential of some of these young fellas. They've just not had good influences in their lives, and if they had one or two better people in their lives, they could have turned out so very differently. But it's never too late. It's never too late for them to say, to hell with all this nonsense, I'm going to have a far more interesting and rewarding life doing things that are really good, and doing good for other people as part of that. Right, well, I've got to crack on with today's story. It's a little beauty. It's the only one I did about Spain, but of course, when you think of Spain, apart from bloody heat, you always got to think about bullfighting. And this is the running of the bulls. Every long hot June in Pamplona, Spain, they indulge in an age-old tradition. The town triples in size before the locals let the bulls loose on the crowd. In an organised kind of mayhem, they block off a route through the medieval part of the town. At the bottom of the hill they release the bulls from a huge set of wood and steel gates. This starts at dawn, and anyone mad enough to choose to run the course must run for their lives along the course to the arena. The tourist shops there are full of postcards with pictures of terrified locals and tourists alike dodging rampant angry bulls. You can't but help it, but laugh at the dilemma. Yet a twinge of trepidation creeps in, knowing that it will be me tomorrow. We send a few cards to friends with funny comments and false bravado. We had made it to the first day from San Sebastian, where the five of us in the combi van had been partying hard, watching reruns of Catch-22 and old bullfights where matadors get gored by bulls. Drinking the local sangria all day and dancing all night. Pamplona, for 1 week, would be party central. Celebrations bordered on the religious, but out of the five of us, only myself and Seedy were up for the ultimate challenge, the bull run itself. The others were happy to eat, drink and party all night. We had found a large river frontage where we set up camp, and other combi vans were drawn like moth to flame until it resembled a village. Seedy and I had decided to check out tomorrow's route, so we had an idea of what we were in for. After checking out the tourist shops, we decided to walk the route we would run the next day. It was very hot, the sun belting off the high stone walls and cobblestone streets. The roads were narrow and afforded little to no protection from oncoming bulls. Getting some distance on them would be crucial to making it to the arena in one piece. About halfway along our walk, in a pretty run-down, dodgy-looking part of town, a tubby guy with a big, broad smile caught my eye as he happily whispered, "Hashish," in my ear. "What was that?" I inquired with a smile, and he produced what looked like a large ball of horseshit. "What do you want for that?" I inquired suspiciously. It worked out at about 40 British pounds. That'd be about 80 New Zealand. So I took a smaller lump for 10 quid. The chubby Moroccan chap seemed pleased and promised to catch up tomorrow. "We may be as high as kites by then," I mused to Seedy. After stopping up on booze in the form of sangria and cheap wine, we headed back to Combi Village, which was walking distance to a bar where we set up headquarters for drinking and planning. After spending all afternoon getting liquored, we headed back to camp and lit up a fire. Remembering my dubious purchase of hash in my pocket, I asked Seedy and the others if they wanted to go. Pretty soon we were all stoned as crows, staring at the fire and giggling like fools. Not only was this shit real, it was as potent as could be. There was plenty to go round and still more for tomorrow. We turned in before midnight, determined to get up before dawn and head into town. We slept fitfully, our thoughts filled with eagerness for the bull run to begin, and Seedy woke me up whilst it was still dark. I climbed into the passenger seat and rolled a massive spliff. Seedy got behind the wheel and refused my eager offers, so I ended up massively stoned by the time we got to town. We parked up near the start of the run and hurried down to the start, reassuring each other and laughing like kids. Once down on the start by the huge gates, we donned red neckerchiefs, as was the local custom, to show bravado in the face of fear. A 3-minute alarm bell rang out amongst what was by now a huge crowd, and in the panic many of the foreigners started to run up the hill from the gates, to a huge amount of derision from the locals and those foolish enough to stay. The locals whipped up into a fervour of dancing and shouting, waving rolled-up newspapers in the air, and before too long the gates were opened and the bulls released into the waiting crowd. The locals set upon the bulls, whacking them on the shoulders with rolled-up newspapers which cranked the bulls up no end. Upon seeing this, I tore off up the hill so fast my feet barely touched the ground. The crowd was not far behind, leaving the confused and angry bulls to follow slowly as the steep slope slowed them down. Now I understood how we would stay ahead. I relaxed to a jog and took in the scenery. All along the road, people were crammed onto first-floor balconies overhanging the narrow streets. They shouted and cheered at the top of their voices, waving and throwing shit, and I waved like a football player who has just scored a goal. After a short while, Seedy caught up with me. "Better get a move on, they're catching up," he shouted over the din. We both picked up the pace and looked back to see the bulls had reached the top of the hill and the crowd beginning to part around them. Already bodies were beginning to fly or dart out of the way from the angry beasts as they began to pick up speed. Once on the flat, the bulls were outpacing the runners and began to reel us in. With our progress impeded by the crowd, it soon became obvious we would be caught, and a palpable sense of fear swept through the crowd with lots of shoving and shouting. A few more 100 metres and the bulls were upon us. I looked back to see bodies flying and made a dive into a 150mm doorway entrance, whilst Seedy dived into the gutter covering his head. That same look of terror from the postcards painted on our faces as bodies flew in all directions and the bulls rumbled through. After a few seconds, the panic moved forward, and realising we were in one piece, we rejoined the melee from the rear, shouting as more bodies got poked and trampled on. We followed the mayhem up to the arena at the end of the course, broke off and entered the arena. Inside, a crowd gathered in the centre as the bulls were corralled outside, then allowed to enter one at a time. The crowd in the middle formed up in a V shape towards the oncoming bull, which would either shy away or go ploughing straight into them. When a bull ploughed in, the crowd would scatter in all directions, people zigzagging and running in tight circles to keep clear of the bull's nasty horns. As the crowd got more drunk, some took to sitting in the front of the V and one or two took a horrible beating. The ambulance outside did a roaring trade all day. I was far too stoned to join the mayhem and was quite content to drink and shout and be entertained by the crazy crowd down on the sand. No television could do justice to the fun we were having, watching the bulls wreak a little revenge on the crowd. So we watched until proceedings ended, then wandered back to the centre of town for more partying. The streets were overflowing with bands playing traditional music and people dancing, drinking and shouting. At the centre of the throng was a place called the Muscle Bar, with a square full of people and a statue where people started climbing and doing crowd dives off into the crowd. People below were catching them as best they could, but many were falling through and getting smashed on the cobblestones below. They would then be dragged off to the waiting ambulance. All 5 of us had met up by now, so we tried to catch as many of these drunken fools as we could until our arms became too sore, and we left them to the inevitable fate of their stupidity. As the night of smoking, drinking and dancing wore on, it all became a bit of a blur, but somehow someone managed to drive us back to Combi Village, where we lit a huge fire and shared the rest of my premium Moroccan horse shit. The day of the first running of the bulls was over, but we vowed to stay on and watch some more, along with one of the bullfights scheduled for that week. The bullfight. The day after our first running of the bulls, we rose quite late and decided to catch an afternoon of real bullfighting. It was another scorching hot day, so we took plenty of water and drove the combi to town. People were still partying hard in the streets with some unconscious bodies lying about. I had very mixed feelings on the way up the hill. On the one hand, I was going to watch some fine bulls being slaughtered by a matador and his cohorts. It would happen with or without me. On the other hand, to have an informed opinion on this, was it not better to witness this thing? To be absolutely fair, I had to go, for fear of missing an essential part of the whole cruelty debate. So it didn't bode well when entering the complex we walked past badly scarred horses belonging to the horsemen, whose job it is to sever the shoulder muscles of the bull with a spear. The armour the horses wear hardly seems adequate, and I feel for the poor creatures. Before the picador comes the toreador, usually other matadors, who stick small spears into the bull's shoulders with great leaps over the horns, showing great agility and courage. Then the picador on horseback, and with an armoured leg guard and horse for protection, he maims the bull's upper shoulders permanently. This stops the bull from being able to turn too sharply and catch the matador off guard. If he does too thorough a job, the crowd boo and jeer him, pelting him with oranges, drink cups, and often bottles are thrown. Thirdly and finally comes the matador, with his red cape and single rapier, with which he sticks the bull down the neckline and through the heart. The matador first carries out a series of passing sweeps of the bull by encouraging the bull to charge at his red cape. With each sweep in the blazing heat, the bull gets slower and more tired until run to a complete standstill, so the fatal blow can be delivered. A terrible ending in the ring for the bull, if all goes to script. But that is not what the crowd hope for. They chant for Toro, the bull, to get the better of the matador, goring or even killing him in the ring. The blood the crowd truly lust for is that of the matador, and that afternoon we saw just that. In the third match of the day, a particularly large black bull was set to by their ranks, yet seemed to hold up well against the early spears. The young matador stood proudly in centre ring, unfurling his cape and doing some passes which became closer and closer. The bull showed great stamina and kept charging relentlessly. The crowd grew restless, even booing the poor matador. A chant of "Toro, Toro" now started up, and still the bull continued to charge. With great urgency the matador performed a little longer, then made his mind up, revealing the rapier to deliver the final blow. But he was wrong, and the bull still too fresh. As he came forward with the sword, the bull charged again. The rapier glanced off the bull's shoulder, and he hooked the matador cleanly in the guts, lifting him off the ground. The crowd as one leapt to their feet, shouting, "Toro, Toro," at the top of their voices as the matador staggers to the ground. Visibly shaken, he regains his composure and tries to deliver the fatal blow a second time. Once again he misses. The bull picks him up and smashes him into the ground, almost running him through with a horn. The crowd is whipped up into a frenzy as they bay for the blood of the matador. "Toro, Toro, Toro." Badly damaged, the matador staggers to his feet to try a third time, and to all our dismay the bull is killed on the third lunge of the injured matador. The magic is suddenly ended, yet it is unlikely the matador will ever fight again after his failure at this fight. The poor dead bull was dragged out of the arena to claps and cheers for his bravery, and I realised another dimension of bullfighting that was not previously appreciated. I felt sick, but elated together at the conclusion of their epic match. I could appreciate the Spaniards' love for such an exhilarating sport, but at the same time the death of these fine animals was hard to take. Not having those hundreds of years of tradition behind me lended an unbiased opinion, but robbed a little of the appreciation. The skill and bravery of all involved is beyond question, and the cruelty is palpable. It was a step back in time that I had never experienced before, and never will again. I imagine little has changed through the centuries, the pomp and pageantry of the costumes or the bravery of their foe. Such old traditions cannot be cast off lightly by its people, as tradition blends into identity. At the end of the day we went back to the bar near Combi village to get a feed, get drunk and talk over the day's bullfighting. Opinions varied greatly as to the merits of the sport, but the skill and bravery required were undoubted. I believe doing the bull run and watching some bullfighting live added some perspective that others who had not indulged seemed rather aloof. To grow up as a local and be awash with the culture adds another perspective again. There is no middle ground in this. Such is the passion and joy of the event itself. It is impossible not to get caught up in it all. Some of the love of the moment rubs up on you. More intoxicating than any liquor or hash, it takes a place in the heart. I look back on those hot days of Spanish summer wistfully. Time and distance turns the perspective to the finest and most memorable pieces. The feelings of adulation and terror mingle with such humour, fun and dancing. Life well lived with passion for the moment. And one bite lasts a lifetime. Well, it's me for another day. I want to say a big thank you especially to Michael and Veronica, who work so hard here in this not-for-profit organisation, a local community radio station that looks to serve the general public and allow people like me who would otherwise not have a voice an opportunity to talk not just about suffering and the ways through that suffering, but also to talk about the moments of joy that they've had in their lives. And I think you can see I've had a pretty fabulous adventure in my life. I gave up money for adventure, and I certainly have no regrets. If I had to do it, I would do every single thing exactly the same again. I have loved so much of it. It has been so good. And at the end of the day, those memories are what truly saves me from the pit of insanity. That's what I live for, is creating more of those memories. I'm going to send you out on a song. It's rather appropriate, by one of my most favourite artists in the world, the late, the great, the magnificent Aretha Franklin. And this song here is called Save Me. Thank you to all the sponsors, Wairarapa TV. Tell your friends about the show, get them onto it. It's good, they'll love it. This is Save Me. I'll see you next week.